Deep in the heart of the New Forest is a quaint settlement known as Buckler's Hard. This picturesque village is full of nautical history and where giant ships of war were built for Britain during the Napoleonic War and supporting Lord Nelson at Trafalgar. Join us for a walk around and find out more about its important maritime past. The New Forest in the south of England was created by William the Conqueror in 1079 as a new hunting forest, and the term forest refers not to the trees, but a forest law, meaning an area reserved for the king and his officers to hunt. Today it's a national park where horses and donkeys are free to roam. You'll likely see them as you carefully drive towards Buckler's Hard. There is parking on site with charges from £2.80 depending on the time you stay. Walking around the village is free, but for those wishing to find out its past, then a visit to the museum is well worth it. Tickets are currently £5.90 for adults. The well laid out exhibits and displays that depict working life in the village 200 years ago give you an interesting and fun insight before heading down to the houses, boat slips and the river. Buckler's Hard and the Beaulieu River are part of the Beaulieu estate. King John granted monks the right to build a Cistercian abbey at Beaulieu in 1204, and many of the goods and materials for the construction and growth of Beaulieu village passed up the 12-mile river. We'll see more of the abbey and the Beaulieu Palace in next week's video, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. The village started by accident really in 1722 when the estate was owned by the Montague family, which incidentally still own it today. John, 2nd Duke of Montague, was attempting to set up a sugar import and export business in the West Indies and started clearing land, building the 80-foot wide street and constructing houses in preparation, calling it Montague Town. His expedition turned out to be a disaster as the French beat him to it and he lost all his money, but the village was almost completed and became known as Buckler's Hard, possibly after a local family called Buckle. By 1740, the Royal Dockyards were looking for private shipyards to assist in the building of ships to keep pace with the amount needed. The Duke of Montague proposed the village for its deep water, wide street for the materials needed, and the oak and elm trees in the area for timber. He was awarded a contract and the shipbuilding village was born. In 1744, Henry Adams arrived on the Beaulieu estate as an overseer. Settling in, within a few years he married a local girl and became the master shipwright, overseeing the day-to-day running of the shipyard. He was a tenant of the Montagues, living in this house right beside the quay and slipways. You can see it's slightly more upmarket compared to the other houses. His early commissions were 20 and 32 gun vessels, but the contracts he won secured the shipyard for the next 100 years. Inside the museum you can see some of the drawings and models of the early ships, along with the tools they used for construction. In the 1770s, the shipyard expanded with 5 slipways and a new quay. This enabled them to take on much larger projects, 64 and 74 gunships. A detailed model gives us an insight into how the village looked in 1803, with 2 large gunships well under construction, the timber stacked up either side of the street, with more ready for soaring in a field at the top of the village. A single ship could use up to 2,000 full-sized oak trees. These are the original 1770 slipways for building and launching the ships. The largest two for the huge 64 and 74 gun vessels. The marina would not have existed in the 18th century, allowing the ships to be launched, sliding into the river right out to the bend, before heading downriver and out to sea. It must have been a noisy but incredible spectacle. Some of the famous Navy warships built here include the huge 74-gun Agamemnon in 1781, quoted by Lord Horatio Nelson as being his favourite ship, and the 36-gun Euryalus, nicknamed Nelson's watchdog ship for reporting on the movements of the Franco-Spanish fleet shortly before the Battle of Trafalgar. This took place at Cape Trafalgar, off southwest Spain on the 21st of October 1805. It lasted just 5.5 hours, in which Napoleon was defeated and Admiral Lord Nelson was shot by a French sniper, dying a few hours later. The museum has some artifacts of Nelson's, his baby clothes and a lock of his hair. It's worth noting that between April and October a sightseeing boat runs from the quay for you to take to the river and see the village from a different perspective. Many of the houses lining the high street are still lived in today, but a few are open to visitors and free to see without a museum ticket. On the right-hand side as you look up the village were the shipwright cottages. This one gives us an indication of how the extremely skilled craftsmen lived. Some settled in the village, whilst other workers would only stay for the duration of their contracts. A 7-year apprenticeship meant they earned good wages, between 25 and 30 shillings a week based on productivity. This afforded them some luxuries and comforts. In contrast, on the other side of the street were the labourers' cottages. This exhibit in the museum recreates such a home. Earning a lot less than a shipwright, you can see the difference in the accommodation, with more squalid conditions for the family or the additional lodgers they might take in. The men worked in the yard whilst the women would seek employment as domestic servants or farmhands. Here we see a recreation of the local pub, the New Inn, the hub of the village if you like, where locals could gossip, arrange shady deals and possibly partake in some smuggling. The exhibit is in the exact location of the original pub and is recreated to look how it might one evening during the 1790s. St Mary's Chapel was once a resident's home and then the village local school in the mid-19th century. Some services were held here, but when it closed down in the 1880s, a proper conversion to a chapel took place, with an altar added and a dedication to St Mary. The altar frontal was designed and created by Belinda Lady Montagu, featuring the Tree of Life and representing the wood used to build the ships. Make sure you take a peek on the floor to the right of the altar. When they were doing some renovations, a secret underground cellar was found, still with bottles inside, possibly used for smuggling in the 18th century. For a delightful riverside walk along the banks of the Beaulieu River that ends up in Beaulieu Village, follow the path from the marina. It's well signposted. After 100 years of success for the small village, the end of the Napoleonic Wars and the Industrial Revolution that introduced new ways of building ships in iron meant that Buckler's Hard fell into decline. The skilled workers moved away to towns and cities, able to embrace the new technologies and provide work. Many of the resident villagers continued to work as labourers on the Montagu estate or found employment on the river. The building of steam-powered pleasure crafts that sailed the river provided a new income for the village, with day trippers coming to the pretty area. After World War II, car travel increased and more tourists arrived. The Maritime Museum opened in 1963 and has grown into the immersive experience we see today. A marina was created in 1971 to provide mooring for pleasure crafts, and so the village has continued to adapt to meet the changing needs of modern life, but retained all its history and charm. At the same time, other areas of the Montagu estate were evolving, with the opening of the Beaulieu Palace House and Gardens in 1952, and then the National Motor Museum in 1972, both just a few miles away in the Beaulieu village. And that's where we'll be heading next week, to visit the stunning Montagu Palace House with its gorgeous rooms and history. The ruins of the Beaulieu Abbey that King John gifted the land for in 1204. And a quick look inside the National Motor Museum that draws tens of thousands to the area each week. We've had a wonderful time visiting Buckler's Hard and exploring its maritime past. Join us again next week as we unwrap more of the Montagu history on the Beaulieu estate. Thanks for watching The Memory Seekers.